Then there's climate change. There's evidence that the climate is changing. I argue that I don't care if people want to attack the scientific foundation, that people in the street all over the world know that something's happening. We all know. It's a fundamental driver of change in water resources, yes, but even more, it's a driver and it has an impact on the other forces for the use of water. The climate impacts are greater if you measure them in dollars in the developed countries. Why? Because the infrastructure that we have built is worth billions of dollars. So if it gets damaged, it's billions of dollars of losses. But if you look at it another way, as a percentage of GDP, look what happens. The poor countries with low-value infrastructure don't lose very much in terms of dollars. So don't compare how many dollars there are that were lost in Haiti because of the earthquake with how many were lost in the effects of Katrina. It's not the way to look at it. Look at it in terms of percentage of their GDP. That's the real impact that it is on those countries. And you know, there's already been a mention this morning, I think, in talking to the person who spoke on Pembina, about the lack of data. Well, the lack of data is not just a problem in Alberta. It's not just a problem in Canada. It's a problem in the world. We're one of those who have some data. On this map, this map shows networks for collecting hydrologic data, but only the ones in blue are still functioning today. So basically, only North America and Europe are collecting and reporting data on their water costs. We don't know anything about the rest of the world. And we're at a time when we're trying to deal with modeling global climate change and the impact on water. We don't know how much water there is, we don't know how much runoff there is, and we don't know how much water is being used for different purposes. Yes, there's some progress. The world is basically on track for meeting the global targets for MDGs, so to provide access to half the people who were without access in 1990.
What's MDG?
Oh, Millennium Development Goals, excuse me. They have already been mentioned by our previous speaker. There are a number of them, and only one, although we ought to see, as the speaker has, as Cesar has said, water is related to every one of those goals. But there is only one objective that's specifically related to water, and it's access to water supply, drinking water supply and sanitation. Globally, we'll meet it. We'll meet it because some big countries like China are going to meet it. But if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, they're not going to. And then if we look at sanitation, which is the second part of it, it's even worse. And even globally, on the global average, we're not going to meet the target of providing sanitation for half of those who didn't have it at the beginning of the MDG period. These goals, by the way, were to be met by 2015, and it's clear today that they won't be. Investments. I lost myself, okay. I'm trying to not get too far behind. Investment. Why do you invest in anything? Well, to get a financial rate of return. Well, water is not a good place to invest if that's what you want. Because for one thing, it takes large infrastructure. The returns don't start to come until after the large investment is made. And so as a rate of return, it's a poor number. So it's not surprising that the private sector doesn't want to get involved in water infrastructure. At the other hand, governments are investing even less in water infrastructure than they were. And this is reflected also by official development assistance, which is on this chart. While there has been an increase because of the MDG on drinking water and sanitation, there has been an increase in official development assistance in that sector. Other areas, like projects to provide infrastructure for irrigation, are not being financed. So that one of the other Millennium Development Goals, feeding the world, is also going to suffer because of lack of investment in water. And ultimately, there are only three sources of financing. One is taxes, another is tariffs that the users pay for it, and the third one is assistance from like philanthropy or from outside the country. I've been insisting all along that there's a strong link between water and economic development. The overall goals of the MDG were to reduce poverty in the world, reduce the number of people living in poverty by 50%. You can provide them with sanitation and drinking water, but if you don't provide them with jobs, you're not going anywhere. And this requires infrastructure as well, for energy, for industry, all of these things. What surprises me is that there's not more investment, because while perhaps in financial terms it doesn't make sense, in economic terms it makes a lot of sense. For every dollar that was spent by the US Army Corps of Engineers, who are responsible for water infrastructure in most of, at least east of the Rocky Mountains in the US, for every dollar that was spent, and they began in the 1930s under Roosevelt to fight the Depression by building water infrastructure. For every dollar that has been spent by them in water infrastructure, there's been a return of $6. And WHO, the World Health Organization, tells us that for every dollar that gets spent on water supply and sanitation, the return can go from $3 all the way up to $30, depending on the country. So why don't we invest in water? I think partly it's because we need a paradigm shift. I've been working in water all my life, and lots of other people work in water supply and sanitation and hydropower and infrastructure. We know the importance of water, but we don't make the decisions. The people who make the decisions maybe are not aware, but the ones who decide what should we do, what should be our energy policy, what should be our agriculture policy, when should we invest and what do we invest in? It's not people in the water sector like myself. It's people, yes, in government, but also major investors in the private sector. And even, they have a lot of power these days, leaders in the NGOs who can influence votes, who can make the decision makers, at least in government, understand what they want.